Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the session of the C20 Summit. Sorry that we are starting a little bit late. We've had some technical challenges, but I think we're all set and we're running live right now. So welcome again to the session from the local to global room, Farmers' Perspective on Risk-Informed Development. My name is Valeria Drigo. I am the policy lead at the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, or GNDR, and I will be your moderator for today. We have an exciting panel of experts from literally all over the world, which is incredible, and we'll hear more from them, from their experiences in risk-informed development. But let me just introduce a little bit the session first and the C20 Summit. Just a couple of words on the C20. So Civil 20 is an independent engagement group of the G20, and it's a global platform for civil society organizations in the G20 process, delivering civil society's demands to world leaders. The C20 community comprises of more than 1,000 CSOs from all around the world, which have been channeling the voice of civil society into the G20 process since 2013. Each year, the C20 convenes voices from CSOs, non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, global policy experts, and G20 senior officials, ministerial representatives from G20 and non-G20 countries, but also activists, influencers, in this summit that will run for the next few days. And this will help determine the policy solutions required to ensure a sustainable and inclusive society. So this session will bring some perspective from the local level to inform the conversation, inform the discussions of the summit. It's exciting to be on the first day of the summit. I think we'll have opportunities to then join more sessions, but also maybe to reflect on some of the outcomes of this session while we go through the summit. So we're here for about 90 minutes today. I'd say probably 80 now, and we'll explore a bit how local experiences interplay with global development discussions and feed into it. This session will also aim to address topics related to trade agreements and global supply chains, and stress the importance of protecting the communities, the communities these agreements serve. And we'll emphasize the importance of disaster risk reduction, and we'll explore methods to effectively achieve DRR, while also making the case that local people's ownership over the development of policies and practices is important to ensure risk-informed development. We'll also look at ways to scale education on risk-oriented projects and explore methods of aiding those in need of practical and technical support. So there's a lot that we'll be covering in this session, and I'm very excited to introduce the speakers for today. We have Ajay Jha, who's the director of the Center for Community Economics and Development Consultant Society. He also coordinates a pan-Indian collective known as MAUSAM, the Movement for Advancing Understanding on Sustainability and Mutuality. It's an initiative that aims at promoting sustainable development, climate justice, and equity. Ajay is also on the board of conveners of the Asia Pacific Research Network, and he's a member of the Asia Pacific Regional CSOs Engagement Mechanism of the Agenda 2030, which is, for those of you in the region who have been involved in sustainable development and Agenda 2040, you will know it's a collective of more than 500 CSOs from Asia and the Pacific. Ajay is also a regional facilitator of CSOs for the UN Environment Programme in Asia and the Pacific. And at core, he's a development policy analyst and trainer, and he's engaged with issues around not just sustainable development, but also climate change, agriculture, food sovereignty, trade, and human rights. Then we have Murat Karipov, who's the deputy director of NASHVEC from Kyrgyzstan. He works on the promotion of democratic reforms, the rule of law and accountability in Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia. Murat has also been engaged in the process of human rights protection, creation of sustainable mechanisms for transparent election systems by monitoring, by independent monitoring of the elections process. He's worked as a lawyer for ethnic and religious minorities, and is a certified trainer for the European Peer Training Organization on Gender Equality and Human Rights. We'll then have Zakir Hossain, who's the CEO of Farmers Voice Research Institute from Bangladesh. Zakir established the Farmers Research Institute, where he's been working for more than 18 years. And Zakir is active in trying to bridge the existing gaps among policymakers, researchers, and local people. He's also a member of the Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Organizations Engagement Mechanism, together with Ajay, and he's a member of GNDR as well. Zakir represents the Farmers Major Group at the Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, but he's also engaged in global processes around the UN High-Level Political Forum, the UNFCCC process, and he is an observer to the Green Climate Fund and the Climate Investment Fund. And then we have Emilia Reyes, who is the Program Director of Policies and Budgets from Equidad de Género, Ciudadanía, Trabajo y Familia, which translates to Gender Equity, Citizenship, Work and Family from Mexico. She's specialized in gender responsive public policies and budgets linked to sustainable development, including comprehensive disaster risk management and climate change. In these fields, she also trains governmental officers, from the legislative, judiciary, and executive branch, as well as UN agencies and at national and regional level. She has been an organizing partner for the Women's Major Group for the 2030 Agenda for 5 years, and she's also acted as co-chair for the High-Level Political Forum Major Groups and Other Stakeholders Coordination Mechanism. So that's the group where non-government actors can engage in the HLPF process, in the Sustainable Development process at global level. And she also is the co-convener of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. So we have quite a great panel today, and I just like to maybe start the session. And I would like to give the floor to Ajay first for his intervention. Ajay will he will focus on understanding a bit more what are the risks that climate change poses to farmers, and also some response measures that have been taken from governments, and what are some of the gaps and what can be done to reduce these gaps. So Ajay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilia. Namaste and salam to all of you who might be witnessing this events from various parts of the world. I work with Farmers Major Group and Farmers Constituency in the United Nations Environment Program, and Convention on Biological Diversity, and United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. When we go to these kind of meetings, we hear a lot of conversation on artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, drone, etc., helping farmers all over the world. You find on the internet, the discussion is abuzz on how farmers are being benefited from these things. They have increased their resilience, they have increased their incomes manifold. But unfortunately, I don't find these kind of farmers on the ground wherever we travel in India or across the world. I mean, especially talking about small and marginal farmers. I mean, in India, Asia, in Africa, Latin America, farmers are being impoverished every day, and especially small and marginal farmers are being pushed away from farming every day. So I don't know who are these farmers who are benefiting from the fourth industrial revolution in agriculture, as they say. From the farmer's perspective, I think farmers are still struggling with very fundamental issues: security of land tenure, access to inputs and credit, protection against climate change impacts, protection against land grabbing, uh, reducing public investment in agriculture, and of course, corporatization of agriculture. These are the basic issues that farmers all over the world face. I mean, talking about in India, half of the population is still dependent on agriculture. More than 500, 600 million people are still dependent on agriculture in terms of their livelihood. This is despite the fact that agriculture's contribution in GDP has reduced from 50% at the time of independence in 1947 to right now, it's less than 15% of the GDP. Right now, all the farmers in India are in the streets fighting three legislations that the government has come up, which sort of withdraws protection of the price from the farmers, which the government earlier used to guarantee the farmers. They allow unlimited stocking and hoarding of agricultural supplies by corporates and business houses. These are the kind of issues that farmers are always struggling with. Just to give you a small example of what is needed for the farmers in countries like India, and I believe that this is more or less true of farmers, especially small and marginal farmers all over the world, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, everywhere. Farmers in India, majority of the farmers, 86% of the farmers have less than 2 hectares of land. 31 farmers, if I talk about today, 31 farmers are committing suicide every day. 2,000 of them are quitting agriculture every day. If you talk about what is income of the farmers, it's less than $200 every year. This is the income that farmers are earning in India every year. And mind you, this earning has to support a household of, say, at least 4 or 5 people. The government used to guarantee a price that they will procure farmers' produce at a guaranteed price, which we call minimum support price in India. And for the last 50 years, not more than 6% of the farmers have availed of that price. And if I compare this, right since 1970s, the minimum support price has increased only 20 times till now, while the income or salary of an average government person has increased by 150 to 170 times. So you can understand that how farmers are kept in poverty to subsidize economy. In countries like India, where 50% of the population is dependent on agriculture, the public investment is less than 1% of the GDP. Can you imagine that? As far as climate change impacts are concerned, India incurs an economic loss of something like $2 billion every year due to floods and droughts. And I think it's a very it's a severe underestimation of the losses that we have due to climate change impacts. And 1/3 of that loss is borne solely by agriculture. So you can understand what the kind of situation that is impacting farmers. And as we have insurance policies, but when you go into the details, you find that while the premium paid to the insurance companies have increased by more than 350% in the last 10 years. The coverage of the farmers has remained stagnant. It's hardly 1/4 of the farmers are under any kind of insurance coverage, and the payment or compensation made to the farmers is reducing. I mean, not even 1/6 of the premium that goes to the insurance companies comes back to the farmer as a compensation for crop loss. So you can understand these kind of situations farmers are in India largely, and all the governments over the year have been completely opposed to giving any kind of subsidy to farmers. And it's very ironic when some kind of support is given to farmers, it's called subsidy. And when that kind of support is given to industries, it's called incentives. I said in public investment in agriculture is less than 1% of the GDP of India, but the government provides support to the tune of, say, 6% of the GDP to the industries in the form of tax concessions. So one can easily understand that the governments are not genuinely in support of the farmers, and they think that large dependence of population on agriculture and large investment in agriculture is a sign of backwardness, which I think is a very flawed thinking of the farmer. Flawed thinking. I mean, it's not only India or Asia that farmers are suffering. I mean, even if you look at USA, you look at European Union, small farmers are being pushed out of agriculture every day. Right since we started believing in the free markets, America has less than 1.5% of the population engaging in agriculture. If I give you a small example, 93% of the dairy farmers in America have already closed shop. And in 2019 alone, 3,000 dairy farmers shut their shop because they are no more profitable. In European Union also, small farmers are being pushed out. This is despite the fact that while an Indian farmer receives something like $200 every year in subsidies, a farmer in European Union receives equal to $8,000 per year, and a farmer in America receives 60,000 US dollars as subsidy every year. But the problem is that majority of these subsidies are going to agribusiness companies and large farmers rather than small farmers. Even in America, you look at farming sector is in a loss of more than $425 billion. If you look at suicide rates in rural areas among farmers, it's 45% more than the suicide rates in the urban areas. So it's not only about farmers in India, but farmers as a whole, as a global community. I mean, US FDA informs us that the income of the farmers is in a steep decline since 1960s. This is largely a product of the call of Ronald Reagan when he said, farmers either get big or get out. So all the small farmers are on their way out. I mean, and now you will see why I'm saying this, because trade practices, even after 25 years of setting up of WTO, is increasing challenges and problems for the farmers, especially in small and developing countries rather than in developed countries. And now US is arm twisting countries like Canada, Mexico, Kenya, India for dairy farming. And India, 100 million farmers alone depend entirely on dairy, and the prices have crashed because of the import of dairy products from outside. Last year alone, farmers were compelled to throw away their milk in the streets. And this milk could have filled 66 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So you can understand. In terms of resilience, in terms of disaster risk reduction, I mean, if I talk about institutional disaster risk reduction, disaster risk reduction works in silos. They don't reach the farmers unless an event or a calamity has already taken place. So we need to inbuilt disaster risk reduction policies in the agricultural policies as such, which I don't see happening. But there are several examples talking about best practices. I was also asked to talk about best practices. Farmers in India, farmers in Bangladesh, farmers in Philippines, farmers in Vietnam, all of them in their own groups have come up with something very spectacular. If I talk about only in India, there are several best practices in increasing agroecology, of collective farming, of enhancing farmers' resilience and income. Just one program in a state of Kerala, the program is called Kudumshi. It has 4.5 million farmers, including 3.5 million women farmers who engage in collective farming, and they have sort of risen over floods. Kerala also sees floods almost every year for the last 3-4 years, but they have increased their resilience in such a way through mixed cropping, several kinds of cropping at the same piece of land, collective farming, resilient farming based on natural agriculture. So there are thousands of examples. We don't lack in these kind of best practices, but there is a need for government to support these kind of examples and best practices. And mind you, these best practices are happening with the support from the government at times without the support from the government, and at times despite the policies of the government. So I think it's very simple. Let's keep it uncomplicated. I mean, who says that farmers need artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, machine learning? I mean, they are now coming up. Yesterday, I was reading something. I came up where agribusiness companies are coming up with the bovine facial recognition technology. In our parts of the world, we don't need these kind of technologies in farming. Who is helped by, which farmer is helped by that? So I think their problems are very simple. Farmers need security of land tenure. They need policies which protect them from impacts of climate change, which is more intensive and more harsh and earlier than protected. They need protection against corporatization of agriculture. They need protection against monoculturization of agriculture. If I talk about today, only 3 species of food crops, wheat, rice, and maize, provide half of the calorific requirement of the people. Only 5 animal species are providing more than 35% of the protein that people require. So farmers, especially small and marginal farmers, requirements and demands are simple, and only if we can enable them with what is due to them, if we can ensure that they get market access in developed countries, the countries adopt policies which protect them, the countries adopt a policy which ensures them remunerative price. I think these are about risk-informed development with the farmers. There are several kinds of false solutions. No farmers need that. So we need to very well understand and watch out who is trying to eat our food and who is trying to steal our agriculture and livestock. I'll stop here. Thanks. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you very much. I think we're gonna have a Q&A session at the end of the speaker's presentation. Thanks for highlighting, a couple of things that I've noted down as the importance of cross-cutting, embedding DRR into agricultural policies, but also that sometimes low-tech solutions are what we need to, increase resilience of farmers. And it's a matter of understanding and listening to what are some of the activities that farmers are already doing on the ground and what is that can be learned from them specifically. So it's, I think these are some topics that might be picked up then in the Q&A part afterwards. I'd like to welcome Pefi Kingi, QSM. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you for making it to join us. You are joining us from Australia, from Victoria, if I'm not wrong. Just as a way of introduction, Pefi is, as she defines herself, a daughter of the Pacific, and she is a Pacific focal point for migration on the Global Action Committee. Together with the representative Akmal Ali from the C20 International Advisory Group, she has been coordinating the Pacific team contributions into 8 of the 11 C20 working groups on behalf of the Pacific. So quite a big engagement in terms of the C20 and the G20 summit. Pefi will cover, she will bring some perspectives on labor mobility in the Pacific region, with a focus on workers working in farms in New Zealand and Australia. And I think it will be quite interesting to hear a perspective from the Pacific on a similar subject that Ajay was speaking on. So Pefi, please, the floor is yours.
Mataki tu monu tangalo. Mataki tu monu tangalo. Fra lofala hiat kem tulu si fra wek hiatua ko whirwea kem ngauni. Greetings to you from the four corners. On behalf of our Pacific group, we acknowledge North Bint Mohammed. We acknowledge Dania Al-Maina, the coordinator of the Global to Local Working Group, and our Pacific representative, Akmal Ali. We acknowledge and are grateful to Rahaf Al-Sanusi, co-Sherpa, and her partner colleague. Thanks to Anne Lees of the Education Working Group. Due acknowledgement to my younger brother from Vanuatu, who may not be here just yet. He has a long way to paddle. And to Mr. Sadkur Hossan of Crisco Sol, whose invitation I welcomed to present the following. This is a summary of expressed opinions, perspectives, and positions of Pacific civil society leaders and leads from a few regional fora and dialogue meetings that have taken place in the Pacific region. I hope I represent well the voices and issues of Pacific migrant labourers employed on the farms of New Zealand under the recognised seasonal employer scheme and the Pacific workers on the farms of Australia under the seasonal workers program. Risk-informed development can be a tool of empowerment for Pacific civil societies in sending and receiving countries, Pacific farmers, and Pacific migrant labourers. In terms of the background, allow me to summarise the seasonal worker program under the Australian government and the recognised seasonal employer scheme under New Zealand. It assists employers in the agriculture and accommodation sectors to fill employment gaps unable to be met by the Australian and New Zealand workforces. It also contributes to the economic development of seasonal workers from 9 participating Pacific countries, that is Fiji, Kiribati, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu. And it permits workers to work for a period of 14 weeks to 6 months. The seasonal worker program offers employers in the agricultural sector a reliable returning workforce when there is not enough local Australian and New Zealand labour to meet the seasonal demands. For the workers and their families, this is a life-changing opportunity. Pacific seasonal workers benefit from the opportunity to earn Australian and New Zealand wages and gain valuable on-the-job learning opportunities. Many seasonal workers use the money earned to pay for their education, start a small business, their children's education, build a house even. But for most concerned, it is not only their families who benefit, but also their villages, their countries. By 2030, we are speaking of 50,000 or so Pacific migrant laborers who will work overseas. Significant job shortages in the Pacific countries mean that there's a large, willing, seasonal labor supply. In fact, there's fierce competition for places, and some sending countries have much higher rates of participation than others. As grateful as Pacific communities and families are for the schemes from New Zealand and Australia, it does need to be risk informed, and the following needs to be included in reviewed policies, revised strategies, and future planning. We must acknowledge also the multiple concurrent threats or emerging global threats. It constitutes more than just risk management. It is imperative that we understand emerging complex risks and not ignore its importance in development decisions. We in Pacific civil societies endorse that risk-informed development allows for development to become a vehicle to avoid and reduce risk and build resilience. Only resilient development can become sustainable development. We all know that. Sustainable development initiatives will fail unless they are indeed risk-informed. And so the pandemic has really tested all of us. In our Pacific histories, we have experienced periods of volatility, changing risks, upheaval, but the challenge now facing all of us, the Pacific, the world at large, and all sectors, governments, politicians, policymakers, business, and community leaders, is that the rate, the frequency, the intensity, the nature, and the geographical location of threats and subsequent risks is indeed changing. Now we, including farmers, Pacific migrant laborers, all face evolving threats, such as this pandemic. Food insecurity, financial and economic instability, cyber fragility, unstable national sovereignties, transnational criminal networks and terrorism, geopolitical volatility, conflict, antibiotic or antibiotic resistance, and severe environmental changes, climate change, our oceans, our seabeds, climate change, all of which are creating complex risks that could undermine development gains made to date. Pacific civil society endorsed development imperatives that need strategic planning, which are risk-informed. We all need to be vigilant about ensuring that uncertainty and risk is an integral part of our targeted developments. Despite the beneficial effects of international labor migration, Pacific migrant workers face many other challenges, including possible modern slavery, safety of the Pacific labor farm workers, especially to prevent increased risks in foreign countries, threats to women workers and youth workers, abuse, exploitation, wage theft, you've heard them all, discrimination, abandonment, being stranded on foreign soil, hunger, health threats, not COVID related, health threats, COVID related, unsafe working conditions, which were often dirty, demeaning, dangerous, especially during the pandemic restrictions. They were overcrowded, did not allow for social distancing, no PPE provided. Lack of means of communication. How hard should it have been to have developed an app where these people could have maintained communications with their families who were worried and support networks at an economical rate? Pacific civil society in sending and receiving countries, Pacific farmers and Pacific migrant laborers of Fiji, Kiribati, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, endorse as follows. 1, that we must be supported to build capacities and expertise to deliver risk-informed decisions. Please stop contracting overpaid non-Pacific consultants to teach us what we must know and determine about our business as farmers and Pacific farming. 2, that we must be included in the dialogue of evaluating risk tolerances and decision criteria. 3, that we must be part of the dialogue concerning utilizing and modifying tools and methods for risk-informed development. 4, that we must be part of the dialogue about strengthening data collection to provide evidence base. Socioeconomic, climate, hydrological, health, disaster losses, the type of data that is needed when you're conducting risk analyses, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, or a mixed method. 5, that we must be part of the action plan about strengthening monitoring and evaluation systems and their transparencies. Monitoring and evaluation, as we all know, are critical components of risk-informed development. We want to determine what that looks like for Pacific. 6, that we must be included in dialogue concerning plans for innovative financing mechanisms for risk-managed, risk-informed development. 7, that we must be included in the dialogue concerning research about, with, for, by Pacific. 8, that we must be part of the action plan focused on promoting cultures of risk governance and risk communication and development. Many policymakers, financial investment, business communities tend to focus on risks that can be quantified, particularly monetarily, and discount or ignore non-quantifiable risks. This needs to change, and all unquantifiable risks need to be included in the discourse. For example, ethical considerations must take into consideration gender, disability, age, ethnic group, political marginalization, and environmental and cultural rights. In conclusion, I hope I have represented well the Pacific civil society in sending and receiving countries, Pacific farmers, and Pacific migrant laborers' voices who have met, talked at length, and who are clear that they must be part of the conversations, dialogues for risk-informed, sustainable farming towards increased global development. This neo-colonial period of development must avoid previous histories of imposition recurrent to exploitation, ongoing abuses, and increased harm. Risk-informed development can be a tool of possible empowerment for Pacific civil society in sending and receiving countries, Pacific farmers, and Pacific migrant laborers. Kia tūtanga loa e mawhala o e tūturo, ke he anhi ngoa hako pihia, hana whakalofa noa. Merci, whakahue atu, shukran.
Thank you, Pefi. Thank you so much for this powerful intervention. I think, you know, you've touched on so many things, and I think in the end, we need contextualized solutions that leverage local knowledge, local expertise, that involve the people who are directly affected by disasters, by poverty, by unequal access to labor market, unequal access to solution to agricultural issues. And I think, you know, this need for involving those who are on the front line is essential. And I think it's something that we need to continue stressing, and we need to do more to make sure it happens. And I think this links so well to our next speaker, Murat from Kyrgyzstan. Murat has been involved in a local level monitoring of disaster risk, and that's called Views from the Frontline. It's a project that several GNDR members are undertaking in various countries around the world. And this really looks at involving communities and people, individuals at risk, in not just the data collection, which is, I think, essential, but also in understanding what are the priority threats, how this can be solved, and what are some actions that the community themselves can take together with the local government and together with national governments to build their own resilience. So Murat, the floor is yours. We'll be delighted to learn more.
Yeah. Dear participants, first of all, let me appreciate all of you, and especially Valeria, for giving such opportunity for creating such a dialogue platform. And I think it will be rather difficult for me to talk after such impressive and heartbreaking speech of Pefi. It was so great to hear her experience of working, and I think it will be really interesting and fruitful for us to discuss maybe some ways of possible cooperation together, because experience of Pefi sounds really close even to our country. And first of all, I would like to say that for nowadays, I am the coordinator of the View from the Frontline project here in Kyrgyzstan, which is the country in the Central Asian region. Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you very well. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, here in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, we implemented the View from the Frontline project in cooperation with the global network of the CSOs on disaster risk reduction. And I would like to share with you our results, that our outputs that we found, and I think it will be also interesting for you. First of all, I would like to say that during our work, our strategic purpose was to identify the key threats for the representatives of the local communities in 3 main districts here in our country. 3 different regions and especially far regions, because it's difficult for local communities to be sustainable, especially in the far regions here in Kyrgyzstan. So after the research work, after collection data about their threats and possible risk for these local communities, we found out that it's necessary to create a separate dialogue platform to deliver the voices of the local communities to the local authorities, in order to combine them, in order to build some kind of bridge of communication between them. And that's why we involved several national departments from the government, independent experts, research agencies, partner organizations, even ombudsman office. It's a human rights protector official. And we created the National Advisory Committee, which is NAC here in Kyrgyzstan. And every representative of the local communities, of the national authorities, of the CSOs and partner organizations is represented in this structure in the National Advisory Committee. So after creation of this group of experts and local communities, our next step was to deliver their voices of the local communities and to identify the most problematic aspects for people who live in risky areas, because here we have several such regions with risky areas. For example, in the south of Kyrgyzstan, we have some areas where people live in the areas with a high level of uranium radiation level. And also we identified before the local community, local government, these problems, and even conducted several meetings with the representatives of the national authorities. And it was, actually they were surprised with the real explanation of the real facts, which is what's happening in the regions of Kyrgyzstan. And after these working meetings, we decided to continue our work, and now we collected 15 local communities, in the most dangerous areas, and decided to change to initiate positive changes in these regions. Also, the main strategic document we used, it was the GNDR strategy, and we took the most appropriate points of the GNDR strategy that can be implemented here on the local level, and spread it on the local level. So also as a result, we decided to identify, as I said, to identify the most problematic aspects, and step by step we want to, in close future, because actually we planned to start this work even before, but because of the spreading of the COVID-19 pandemic here in Kyrgyzstan, our work has been stopped for several months, but now the situation is getting better, and that's why we plan to start this work even in the more close future, even I think from the middle of this month, and to meet again with the local communities, and to continue our mutual work with them, with involvement of the national authorities. And our further steps, we see like this, like expanding access for public CSOs to provide the necessary information about the risks and threats that local communities are facing with. And this will be in cooperation with the wide range of experts, as I said, and CSOs are partners and independent experts. Even also, we plan to involve mass media also in order to inform all over the country, even all the Central Asian region, about the work that will be implemented. And also, we plan to move on to specific steps to reduce the risks and threats for the local communities, because except on, as I identified, for example, except on the problem of the high level of the uranium radiation, we also have the problem of that local communities, they do not have enough access to the clean water. They also landslide, the problem of landslides, because here our country is situated in the region with the high level of mountainous seismic activity. And here we will implement all this work in the close future, and even in order to make this work more effective, we worked out 15 local action plans according to the GNDR strategy, and that will be implemented. Yeah.
Thank you, Murat. Thank you. I think it's it's interesting to see how, also in sectors outside agriculture and outside, like farmers, there is the importance of understanding what are the key threats that people face, that communities face, and make policies that address these threats is essential. Your example of how water pollution due to radiation, to uranium radiation, was not seen as a key threat from the government side, but then involving communities and understanding from them has brought this issue up, and now there is an understanding that it needs to be dealt with. I think it really links to what Pefi was saying before and what Ajay was saying, the importance of really understanding the context and the local reality and building policies around that. I think Zakir will be a nice continuation in this topic. Zakir will share his experience from the reality of farmers in developing countries, having to deal with disaster risks, with climate change, with the hope of building, sustainable development and resilience for themselves and their communities. Zakir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much to give me the opportunity to the important session and the second highest global forum, I believe, still. So let's go to the field. I am going to share the screen. Development is not risk neutral. Development always have to have the side effect, if not pseudo effect. It is one of the criteria for development policy formulation and implementation. But at the local level, if we consider the local people as a farmer, now who are the farmers? I am talking about the small farmers, family farmers. As Ozoy and Pefi said, that they are, we are the persons who use far less amount of arable land and supply the most food to the globe. Whereas we produce far less emission and we create less risk.
So how development creates risk, new risk, and add new risk to the locality? Let's have some example from our water sector. we have a canal, Shimulbanga, historical canal, but it was going to be dead without policy intervention. So our community children, they jumped in to the development initiative. And this is how our children are being integrated to the development process. And it attracts the local government, and they feel something shy, so they did the renovation, and we had the canal better. But the food go down, they needed a breeze on one end of Shimulbanga, the canal, and they had the capacity, or they had the knowledge or something, or they didn't care with the canal. So they made the breeze half of the width of the canal. So what will happen, or what is happening, that the water is logging in and our crops are being destroyed. And when water goes down, when water recedes, the silt that water brings in to the canal, it is being deposited. So the canal is going to be dead again. So let's go to the crop variety. During cedar, the local variety, they survive 10-foot water source, but the high input varieties, they didn't survive. But while development practitioners or development policymakers, they try to introduce flood resilient variety, they never consider Kalamani, our local variety that survived the high tide of water source. Let's go to the homestead gardening. We had multi-storied gardening system around our homestead that protected and our house. But during cedar, most of the plants, they fell down just because of the saplings in the nursery. They chopped down, they were told, we had been learned in the university class that you have to chop down the taproot of saplings. Why? Because then it will grow quickly and you will have the money quickly. But it fell on our house, and someone was injured. So the tree is becoming burden then. Let's go to the housing. The corrugated sheet is being considered scientifically that it may injure the people mostly during cyclone or storm. But I see, say 13 years after, I see hardly any policy related to eliminate corrugated sheet in the cyclone prone area. Development is not equal at the national level and the global, local level. At the local level, development is haphazard. It's on the paper mostly, and I'm not talking about Bangladesh only. I'm talking about Asia. I mean, the total developing country, even developed country, they are going to adopt our mismanagement policies. When development funding agencies, they fund the bridge, sometimes the bridge becomes political. Who has the power at the local level, they have the bridge in front of their house. So it doesn't matter, does it fit here or not? Sometimes the bridge is being built, is being left half constructed. We had to make it usable with our local resources. About farmers, if you produce a broom, simply a broom, you have the right to fix the price. But we produce food, we don't have the right to fix price of our food because of a lot of causes, capacities, and yeah, okay, leaving all that behind, what the farmers, local people needs from the policy actions, not commitment, not design, just action, that farmers have to be a stakeholder from policy formulation, planning, implementation, monitoring, and redesign the development. That's why we are working with the school children to formulate a local development guideline that will guide the international policy, that will guide the national policy, regional policy, to inform the local people about the risks from the development. So the policymakers have to consider the risk of the development planning, implementation, and policy. Thank you very much, Valeria, and thank you all the audience.
Thank you, Zakir. I think it's, I always enjoy listening to you, because it's very, you're bringing like some very clear examples of what is the reality on the ground, and how, if only we had used local knowledge and local solutions, we could have made development more risk informed, we could have built resilience. And sometimes it's things you wouldn't really think about. Sometimes it's things that they're quite straightforward for those who are on the ground, but they're not taken into consideration. The political dynamics in place into where development investments go and who's benefiting from them is it's something that it's a challenge, and it's something we often don't acknowledge as much, but he's an important player in ensuring that there is an equitable distribution, not just of resources, but also actions and activities to build resilience. I think now we're gonna hear from Emilia, who will bring a bit of like a global macroeconomic perspective to this discussion. So what are some of the macroeconomic challenges that are brought by the current crisis, how these challenges enhance risk at the local level, and also why is this risk more of an issue for women, and what is the gender dimension of this macroeconomic challenges? So Emilia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to be speaking on this panel, because I think it reflects very well the pervasive negative impacts of the macroeconomic dynamics, and how the path of financialization of development and what we call the extractive financial trends are really having a toll in the daily lives of people. So I think that what this panel is making is precisely making the connection that there is no isolated local community, that it is actually what we are seeing in the different examples all around this panel, all around the world, is that there are bigger trends that we really need to address. Like this example of uranium talks not only about how in that specific context there is a challenge with uranium, but rather globally how we are not regulating extractive industries, and the role of in this case of a system that relies in private sector, that is not accountable, that is not regulated, that is not bound by human rights, and that is not even related to the conditions with the land, in terms of they come and they have a land use and not necessarily minding what is the relation to the intergenerational rights or the biodiversity and ecosystems integrity. So there are many challenges here that I would like to address here, which relates to how, regardless of where we are, regardless of the movement or the cause we have, we really also need to rally towards macro messages, because in the end, there is no community, there is no nation, and there is no region alone that can really thrive in the face of the global challenges we are facing. Climate change is the best example. Not even the most powerful regions can face it on their own, and they're facing very raw realities. But also, having said this, I would like to also highlight, and what has already been said as well, that there is a colonial dynamic in this framing that needs to be highlighted, because in the end, the local communities of the global south, in their many expressions, as had been laid very clearly in this panel, they are the ones who are suffering the outcome of a division of labor, a global division of labor. And so we really need to emphasize this as part of the solutions. What I want to say is also in the Latin American tradition of disaster risks reduction with a gender perspective, is that we really need to address the systemic and structural causes of the risk. And risk also relates to, as has been pointed out, to the development dynamics that are actually more extractive and depleting of the nature, as well as exploitative of the work of people, the time of people, exploitative of the well-being of people, and relentless in attending human rights. So this is why we need to be very clearly, all of the challenges that have been made is precisely because the structural roots of risk. And this is why what we would like to say on behalf of the Women's Working Group, and in support of the call for the Financing for Development Civil Society Group, is that we all need to rally around major demands that are macro in its nature, but the impacts of those agendas are really most felt at the local level. So all of the excellent panels here have been mentioning how in many ways, for instance, the impact of austerity measures in the lack of allocating resources to a rural setting, and enhancing the well-being of people by means of the retrenchment of policies. So there is no social protection. There are no comprehensive policies in access to what is the real technology that people is needing, and also creating, and also inheriting, and also expanding with their own knowledge. There is no relationship to that. So I think there are many issues here that also relate to this macro level, because on the one hand, let me, I can share with you a link of the call for a campaign of campaigns of what are these macro demands that are really impacting at the local level. And because this is, I think, the most important time during this pandemic, in the face of a recession, probably facing a famine, and all of these elements are interconnected, as our panelists have been very clearly mentioning this. So we have this campaign of campaigns that has as cross-cutting principles, evidently human rights, gender equality, environmental integrity, the well-being of persons, a socio-economic transformation, a just and equitable transition for the people and the planet, as well as the democratization of global economic governance and inclusive participation at all levels. Our colleague from the Pacific already mentioned also how these countries in the Pacific are the most impacted for climate change, and also have the least say in meetings like this, like the G20, where all of the powerful countries are making very serious decisions for the faith of humanity as a whole, and especially for all of those communities that are at the forefront of all of these challenges. So we need to be very clear about this this call and our effort being also decolonial, but also feminist, in the sense, I also already mentioned that the challenges, first of all, was the global division of labor, how the North is extracting wealth and resources from the global South, regardless of the human rights of people, but it's also extracting and exploiting the labor of women. Because of the sexual division of labor, women are producing 2/3 of the value that circulates in the world. So actually women have been subsidizing the economy all of this time. And in the time of a crisis, this subsidizing role is actually expanded. So what we have seen in this past crisis in many scenarios with women under lockdown is that they are actually facing a bigger backlash against their human rights. And with women who are not being able to be under lockdown, they're actually at the forefront of their response as first responders in the health, education, food production, etc. So women are really taking the brunt of all of these multi-layered crises. And in this panel, I mean, we have time use surveys that are very clear in saying that this subsidizing that women are doing has also many layers of multifaceted discrimination. And of course, women in the rural communities, indigenous women, women with disabilities, migrant women, and all of these factors that are related very well with the challenges that you have been mentioning here. Those are the ones who are actually spending more time with unpaid domestic and care work tasks. So these are actually the women who are taking the brunt of all of these layers of crisis. So this needs to be very clear in that our solutions need to be decolonial and feminist. And so we are calling for a specific set of demands on why these macro agendas are impacting. First of all, we are saying we need a new global economic architecture that works for the people and the planet. No more meetings with the power club, like the Paris Club, like the G20, like the Bretton Woods institutions, where only the powerful countries are making decisions. We need to come back to the UN and give it again the role that it should have in having a democratic setting where small countries also have a saying at the table. So that is one first demand. We are asking for a summit at the UN on global economic, International Economic Reconstruction and Systemic Reform Summit. The second is calling for debt cancellation. All of our countries are imposing austerity measures by the World Bank, by the IMF, by many development banks. And this is the outcome of all of the examples that have been mentioned is here laid out in front of us, right? When there is cutting on social spending, it is the people at the local level that are being impacted the most. And we have heard as well how actually people, the farmers are actually providing food for the people, but at the same time, they are the ones who are least receiving attention from the public sector in all of the ways it should have. The second demand is related to a UN tax convention for really addressing tax abuse and tax evasion for corporate actors. And this also relates to how governments are not able to have enough domestic resource mobilization to really address human rights, but also to protect a healthy planet. Happy to talk more about this later on, but I want to move to the following one because it's the creation of a global technology assessment mechanism at the UN. We've also heard how actually damaging is the type of technologies that have been imposed on people at the local territories without a proper assessment on social, economic, gendered impacts, so on human rights impacts. So this has to be put at the table. And also a full assessment of the impacts of the current trade and investment framework. I also want to be very specific here. In the finance field, everybody talks about the risk for investors. And it is very interesting how we here are talking about the risk for the people. So in the finance arena, we need to bring this and say, also we need to bring the risk of the people into assessment of financial projects. And that is related as well, for instance, in the logic of the imposure of PPPs, which is also a demand for us on, we need to assess all the logic on bringing private financing into delivering public services, because the UN human rights rapporteurs have already been very keen in emphasizing how PPPs, private and public partnerships, are not only the biggest threat to human rights, and they are also the major driver of poverty. So, and this relates exactly with this type of assessment. And finally, the review of the ODA framework, in which we know, for instance, that per $1 that comes to the Global South in official development assistance, 80 comes out as illicit financial flows, precisely because of corporations not paying their taxes. And all of this undermines very well what our panelists have been saying here. And for instance, in intellectual property rights, how is that really undermining sovereignty, food sovereignty at the local level, and even depleting the well-being, the capacity of communities to enhance the well-being of its people. I think I'm gonna be stopping here, because I know I've already mentioned enough, but I just wanted to emphasize how in Latin America we have a saying. We say that the risks when they're little, they want to be disasters when they grow up. And what we really want to say is we need to tackle the origin of risk, and that is in systemic and structural causes. So we cannot leave abandoned our local communities, and we actually need to make these connections that have been very nicely put in this panel about how the local communities have solutions, but we really need to stand in solidarity to find the common solutions that are affecting us as a humanity, and as the planet. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Emilia. Thanks for bringing us to bringing us to a global level, to a global perspective. I think I really liked, your call to rally around major demands that are macro in nature, but are impactful at the local level. They're decolonial and also feminist. I think there's a lot that we could rally behind, and if we come together, I think we can have a bigger impact. And occasions like sessions here at the C20 summit is a great occasion to start, or to raise our voices a bit, and to get others to raise their voice as well. I think we have a couple of questions coming from the audience, which I'll share with the speakers. Unfortunately, I've been told that we have to end at the hour, so we only have 10 minutes and not longer. So if I could ask just to, any response to the questions, just keep them as short as you can, so that we can end on time. So the first question is on what is the relation between small farmers and food security? And is there a risk that big farmers could leave a gap in the food chain if they get out of business? And then we have another question around climate change. How could climate change affect the farming zones, and what can be done to enhance sustainability of food supplies in this regard? I know that Ajay would like to answer the first question and Zakir the second, so I'll give them the floor, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, please feel free to just unmute yourself and come in after them. Please, Ajay.
Thank you, Valeria. I'll be very brief, just taking on from where Emilia left, talking about the macroeconomic perspective. I first want to challenge the assumption that agriculture or climate change or development cannot be made sustainable without private finances. I mean, I think it's very laughable. Where do private companies bring finance from? They take loans from our bank. They raise money in the market. So it's again just the people's money that they are using. They are not bringing it from their pocket. So I think we need to challenge that assumption, one. Second, we did not talk much about women in agriculture. And I would say agriculture, as we see in India, is highly insensitive to women. I mean, 76% of the women are in agriculture, but they own less than 10% of the land. And everything in agriculture, you look at the basic implements, the hoe and cycle itself, simplest of the agricultural instruments are not made for women. I mean, no women in our in our countries can catch hold of that hoe and big cycle. It's very difficult, and it's even after so many years of so-called development, we have not been able to make agriculture sensitive to women. That is only just a part of the problem of the women in agriculture. Talking about resilience in farming and small farmers. In India, in first quarter of 2020 this year, due to the pandemic, our economy saw a tailspin of 23% negative growth. The economic growth went down by 23%. Only one sector which was making even a bit of growth was agriculture. And these are all small farmers. 86% of the farmers in India own less than 2 hectares of land. Even globally, it's the small farmers who produce, I mean, more than 70% of the food. It's not the big farmers. And we need to remind ourselves that we need small farmers. It's a food for the world cannot be grown in the lab or in the factories. So that's very clear to me that small, marginal, and family farmers hold the key to the world security. Talking about the fall solution, disaster risk reduction planning and implementation. I come from a place, a state in India. Half of the state is in the floods for 3 months in a year for the last 60 years. And people used to grow and learn to live with the floods. They knew that this time flood will come. They will remain inundated for say 2 months, and then water will recede. They used to go to a higher place and then go back to their own places when the water used to recede. But now for the last 30 years, I don't know whether it's a good strategy or a poor strategy. They are creating embankments along the rivers. So what is the impact? Water seeping from the embankment keeps the areas inundated for more than 6 months. They are a hub of disease and vector-borne disease. There is no agriculture for 6 months. Earlier, people used to know that the flood will affect this much region of the state. Everything was known. There was a predictability about the flood. Now, even if the flood does not impact them with that kind of intensity, but when the embankment breaks, there is no predictability about how much region can be affected by flood. So these kind of false solutions we need to identify and insulate risk reduction planning with these kind of local and traditional knowledge by asking people and learning from their wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. Zakir, do you want to briefly come in?
Thank you, Valeria. Well, I'll go for bullet points. That crops will be affected in 2 ways. Either constructive way, some crops will grow better in changing climate, some crops will grow less due to greenhouse gas emission and warming. But to select the varieties, disaster and climate resilient varieties at the local level, till now the tradition is to adopt the races from the corporates. But we strongly believe that, and we strongly see at the local level that if local races are being developed to be resilient, since the local races are resilient already since 100 of years. About the inputs, the farming system must be low input based, either the small farmers, either the big farmers, and the ecosystem must be conserved. Local ecosystem must be conserved, restored, and to be better used. There could be some, must be some safeguard on crop losses through non-forecastable.
Perhaps we've lost Zakir again. In the interest of time, Pefi.
Weather pattern.
Oh, he's back. Yeah, Pefi, please. I'll send a message to Zakir.
Hello, Zakir. In the interest of time, may I take this opportunity to thank the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, not because my executive director is in the room and watching, but because of them. It has allowed us to have entry into the C20 village and to contribute on behalf of Pacific. There's a question on the table about what change would do, or what change to enhance sustainability of food supplies in this regard, that question. May I offer that in Pacific terms, firstly, we pray. It'll do wonders to bring a group together. And then after that, we have a big meal. And then after that, we have a good old discussion and a dialogue and a chat about the possibilities and about the probabilities. So if you are a major decision maker in the room, we welcome you contacting us for a prayer, a feast, and then a good old chat about the possibilities of what we could do together, because that will
help. Thank you, Pepe. Thank you, Pepe, for that's the happiness. Thank you. And thank you for your ED executive. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you also,
Valeria,
for the facilitation. Thank you, everybody. Good evening.
Yeah, sorry, we've run out of time. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to everyone who has been joining this panel. And there's various ways to remain connected in the C20 Summit. Go and have a look at the online space, share your thoughts through the hashtag C20 Summit, and feel free to join other sessions. I'm sorry, Emilia and Murat, if you wanted to say anything, you have probably like a few seconds. But I just wanted to say that it's been a really pleasure for me to moderate this panel, and it's been really interesting to hear from all of you. Yes, so yeah, I think,
can I just,
please, yeah.
Only one sentence. First, let me just again appreciate all of you that you found time to participate here. And actually, you know, even I made some notes. There were so many good and fruitful ideas. Thank you so much, dear colleagues.
Yeah, thank you. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's reach out to one another.
Thank you, the team. We are, as a local people, local community, we are very much honored to have you on the board. I didn't expect that much.